When we think of a personal injury, our minds usually jump to something physical, right? A broken bone, a scar you can actually see. But what about the injuries that are invisible? The psychological harm that can be every bit as devastating. For the longest time, the law really struggled to even recognize this kind of pain. It created this huge barrier for people who needed help the most. Today, we're going to talk about how that barrier finally came crashing down.
And that's really the core question, isn't it? For so long, the legal system just had an incredibly tough time answering it. I mean, how do you even begin to compensate for damage to someone's mind? The rules were confusing, they were complicated, and for way too many people, they were a complete dead end.
Okay, so first things first, let's get on the same page about what mental harm actually means, at least in a legal sense. We're not talking about the normal stress or sadness that's just part of life. For the law to get involved, it has to be a recognized psychiatric illness. Think PTSD or a serious depressive disorder that was directly caused by someone else's carelessness. That's a really crucial distinction to make.
Now, let's rewind the clock a bit. For decades, trying to get compensation for mental harm was like running a legal obstacle course. And one of the biggest, toughest hurdles was this concept called normal fortitude. And when I say difficult, I mean incredibly difficult. You see, the whole legal system was kind of built on these rigid and, let's be honest, pretty outdated ideas about how people should react to trauma. It put this massive burden of proof on the person who's already suffering, making them navigate this complex and, frankly, often unsympathetic process. So here are the hoops you had to jump through. First, you had to have that recognized psychiatric injury, okay? Then it had to come from a sudden shock, like a single terrifying event. And finally, here's the big one. You had to prove you were a person of normal fortitude. Yeah, you essentially had to convince a court that you weren't too sensitive.
Now, I want you to tuck this quote away in the back of your mind because it's pretty much the punchline to our whole story. For a very long time, the exact opposite was true. This whole idea of normal fortitude was this huge wall that victims had to somehow climb over.
And this created a massive disconnect. On one hand, the law was demanding proof of normal fortitude, which was just a ridiculously unfair barrier. It insisted on a sudden shock, which completely ignores trauma that can build slowly over time, like for parents who spend weeks waiting for news about their missing child. And it often required you to have physically seen the event, which left out so many people who were deeply affected by the aftermath. The law just wasn't matching the reality of how trauma actually works.
But then, things started to shift. A landmark case came along that was about to challenge all these old ideas and completely reshape the future of mental harm claims in the law. The year was 2002. This was a truly pivotal moment. The highest court in Australia took a long, hard look at these old rules and basically decided, you know what, these just don't work anymore. The case was actually two cases that were heard together. The first was Tame v. NSW. This involved a woman who developed a psychiatric illness because a simple clerical error on a police report falsely said she'd been drink driving. The second, Annette's v. Australian Stations, was about parents who suffered horrific, drawn-out trauma after learning their young son had gone missing and later died while working alone in the remote outback. These two stories really forced the High Court to face the unfairness of the old system head-on.
And the result? It was absolutely revolutionary. The court just took apart the old rules. They specifically said that this strict requirement for a victim to prove they were of normal fortitude was gone. This was a massive, seismic shift in the law.
So if they tore down all those old barriers, what did they put in their place? Well, the court introduced a new, much more modern, and a much fairer test. It shifted the entire focus away from the victim's resilience and onto a single, powerful question. Was the harm foreseeable?
Think about that change for a second. The old system was basically putting the victim's mind on trial. It was all about their specific psychological makeup. The new system completely flips that around. It puts the focus on the actions of the person who was negligent. The question is no longer, are you tough enough, but should they have known their actions could cause this kind of serious harm?
Okay, so this is the new test in a nutshell. And you'll notice that phrase, normal fortitude, is still in there, but its job is totally different now. It's no longer a hurdle the victim has to prove about themselves. Instead, it's used as a yardstick for foreseeability. The court asks, in this situation, would a person of normal fortitude have potentially suffered a psychiatric injury? If the answer is yes, then the harm was foreseeable. See the difference?
So let's just be crystal clear about what this massive change means. The requirement for a sudden shock? Gone. The need to have directly seen the traumatic event with your own eyes? Gone. And most importantly, that burden on the victim to somehow prove their own mental toughness, gone for good.
So you take this entire complex legal evolution, all those dismantled rules and all the new perspectives, and you can boil it all down to one central question. And that question is simply this: was it reasonably foreseeable that the defendant's negligence might cause this type of psychiatric injury? That simple but profound focus on foreseeability is what really brought the law into the modern age.
So, okay, why do we care about all this? Why does this legal shift actually matter in the real world? Well, because this isn't just some dusty, technical legal argument. This change has profound, real-world consequences for people who are suffering from some of the deepest and most painful injuries imaginable.
This new approach just builds a much, much better system. For one, the law is now much more in line with our modern understanding of psychology. It recognizes that trauma is complex, it's not always caused by a single sudden shock. Second, it rightly puts the focus where it belongs, on the wrongdoer's actions, not on judging the victim's personal resilience. And most importantly, it just creates a fairer, more compassionate path to justice.
Getting rid of the Fortitude Barrier was a huge step forward. It was the law finally recognizing that an injury you can't see is no less real. But it does leave us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. As science and society continue to deepen our understanding of the human mind, what's going to be the next barrier to fall? How will the law have to keep changing to protect our mental well-being?